Welcome to our Mor Nevuchim lecture. We just finished part 2, chapter 36, so we're about to begin part 2, chapter 37. And Rambam has been talking about prophecy, how prophecy works. And I just want to remind you, in order to understand chapters 37 and 38, I'm just going to have to remind everyone of Rambam's brain model, right? The model of the brain according to Rambam. So let me remind you, and this kind of goes back, I think it was chapter 11 in part 2, where Rambam talked about the emanations from the active intellect from God, which then goes into the upper spheres, and then from the upper spheres into the lower spheres, the lower, all the way until it gets to us in our brain, right? Now remember, I want to, nowadays, if somebody were to talk about an emanation coming from God and making our brains work, it would sound like a religious kind of idea, not a scientific kind of idea. But I want to remind you that in the Rambam's scheme here, the idea of an intellect being required to make something move or happen, and the idea that there was a prime mover, that God as an active intellect is the intellect behind everything, right? It was a scientific idea, not just a religious idea, right? So what the Rambam is developing here is really a scientific model, right? Now so basically the way it worked is that active intellect, which is the part of our mind that is doing the thinking. That's the part of our mind where we make calculations, where we make decisions, where we practice logic and make conclusions. That's and so it comes from all the way up above, ultimately God himself, right? And eventually it goes through each of the different stages of the world until it reaches our own brain. And then in our own brain we have an active intellect, which is then doing this kind of thinking. That's one part of the brain. The other part of the brain corresponds with something much more physical, right? Which the Rambam told us before corresponds with physical parts of our brain, right? And that part is what he called the imaginative faculty. That part of the brain is producing all kinds of images in our minds that are related to the sensory phenomenon that we pick up from outside. And the driver of that imaginative faculty is usually, in most people, it's based on what our wants and what our desires are, right? So we're imagining the things that so then the Rambam explained to us that a prophet is someone who has practiced his active intellect, perfected his active intellect so much that he has, usually he in Rambam's world, but he or she has perfected his active intellect so that he knows how logic works, he knows how nature works, he knows how science works, he understands the reality of things, right? And then he is so involved, and he has so ethically and morally perfected himself so that his imaginative faculty, right, is now imagining and seeing images and seeing and creating images and ideas and feelings and thoughts which reflect the accurate perceptions of the active intellect that works well, right? That he has honed to such a degree, both on a moral level, so that he's not thinking about his own selfish interests, and on a scientific level, so he's thinking real, true things as opposed to false notions. Okay, so again, there's the active intellect starting from God, but eventually becoming that part of us that is doing the active thinking, right? And then there's the imaginative faculty, which is much more physical, but which a prophet has learned to completely control. Okay, so in the prophet, they're kind of like fused. All right, so now that we can understand that, we can read through chapter 37 and 38, and we are on page 373 of the Pines edition. It is fitting that your attention be aroused to the nature of that which exists in the divine overflow coming toward us, right? Remember, Rambam is talking about this divine overflow, which is the energy. It's the overflow. It's the energy, the power, the everything that's behind what's in our mind, right? Right. What our active intellect is thinking. through which we have intellectual cognition and through which there is a difference of rank between our intellects. Not all of us have the same level. If you remember, right, in the Rambam scheme, there are intellects that are driving the very spheres of the universe to rotate, right? There are intellects, so those intellects are obviously on a much higher level than you and I. But even within us as human beings, there are intellects that are higher and intellects that are lower, right? Some of those intellects are a little bit higher on, and some of them are not as high. So there's a difference of rank. For sometimes something comes from it to a certain individual, the measure of that something being such that it renders him perfect but has no other effect, right? A person can receive that active intellect, and he can receive this emanation, I'll call it, from God, right? This wisdom that comes to him, and now he knows it. So it makes him perfect. In other words, he now has that knowledge in a perfect way. But that's it. It stops with him. But sometimes, on the other hand, the measure of what comes to the individual overflows from rendering him perfect toward rendering others perfect. He gets that knowledge, and then he shares that knowledge with other people and helps raise them to a higher level. This is what happens to all beings. Some of them achieve perfection to an extent that enables them. You see, you have to understand where Rambam is driving us towards an image of the prophet, right? So the image of the prophet as someone, but we're going to get there, but I'm just giving you a little hint to where he's going in one sense. And that is that the prophet is someone who takes this emanation, this knowledge that he has, right? And then he uses it. It overflows towards others. He uses it to teach others. He uses it to bring others closer towards perfection. Whereas others achieve perfection only in a measure that allows them to be governed by others, as we have explained. And some people only achieve enough perfection that enables them to learn from someone, right? It enables them to be humble enough to learn lessons from others that are teaching them. So you have different levels. Someone can learn on his own. Someone can learn on his own and teach, or someone cannot even learn on his own, but can get knowledge from other people. But he can be open enough to receiving that knowledge. After this, you should know that the case in which the intellectual overflows only towards the rational faculty. So now the Rambam is going to divide human beings into three categories, okay? And remember, you have the active intellect, which starts from God, goes through all of these levels, overflows, which is the language Rambam is using. You can think of it, there's all kinds of terms you can use, and eventually is what powers the rational faculty in our own brain, right? So some people, it stays there. He's going to divide the world into scientists, right? Prophets and soothsayers. Okay, those are the categories, the English terms I'm going to choose. So first, he's going to tell us about the scientists. So those are those people who that rational faculty, which that is perfected, right? So they've thought through everything with logic. They've studied the nature of reality. They know the laws that make things work, how things go, etc. Right? But it does not overflow at all towards the imaginative faculty, either because of the scantiness of what overflows, or because of some deficiency existing in the imaginative faculty in its natural position. Because that person may not have perfected what I think the Rambam is saying here. That person may not have perfected his moral or ethical qualities, right? That person might have it all figured out scientifically, but he hasn't done the work to control the imaginative faculty. His imaginative faculty still has those flaws, still has that selfishness, still has the selfish desires or whatever it is. So he has all the knowledge and the intellect, but his imaginative faculty isn't getting that full straight overflow from God, right? It's characteristic of the men of science engaged in speculation. That's people that are scientists that are engaged in study, right? Speculation is what we would call today scientific study, right? Right? But so that person hasn't taken that knowledge and made it into a vision, right? Now we all know, we can think of scientists, right, that were incredible geniuses, but they weren't the best of people as people, and they certainly weren't moral examples for others. But then when you think of scientists or men, people, men or women who have achieved tremendous levels in science and knowledge, whatever their field of knowledge was, whether it was physics or literature or whatever, but in a field of knowledge, they've achieved a tremendous level. And then that overflowed into them being a leader, a person who does things and had a vision for the world, a vision for making the world better, a vision for raising the level of the people around him or her. That's the second level. That person is the second is the person who's in the class of prophets, which is Rambam was about to say. If on the other hand this overflow reaches both faculties, it comes from God, goes to his rational faculty. He's thought through, he knows, he has his logic, he has his reason, he has his scientific knowledge. And again, by science, that doesn't necessarily mean a specific field of science, whether it's biology or but he has his knowledge of the world straight and rational, right? But then it overflows to his imaginative faculties too. So the things that he dreams about are how to actualize these truths in the world around him, as opposed to dreaming selfish dreams, right? As we and others among the philosophers explains, and if the imaginative faculty is in a state of ultimate perfection, owing to its natural disposition. In other words, imaginative faculty, the Rambam said, is a physical, right? He related it to parts of our brain that's doing these thinking, right? But this person, that faculty is in its state of perfection because it's naturally disposed towards imagining thoughts of greatness, thoughts, visions of literally, I mean, I know it sounds kind of cliche, but visions of world peace, right? This is characteristic of the class of prophets. That's what a prophet is. That's what differentiates the scientist and a prophet. So now we have two categories of people. If again the overflow, but then there's a third category, right? A person who has that overflow coming, but he skips the rational. He skips the science. He doesn't think rationally, right? He doesn't study the world around him, right? He's just imagining all kinds of things, right? It reads so the overflow from God goes to the imaginative faculty, but it skips over rationality and science and reason and knowledge and logic, right? The defect of the rational faculty deriving either from its original is either he's a kind of person who's simply incapable of thinking very much. He's not the way we would call just simply doesn't have a very high IQ, or from insufficiency of training, or he never bothered or never had the opportunity, depending on the situation, to learn and study and read. This is characteristic of the class of those who govern cities, right? While being, and he means that it's in a derogatory way. The people that make themselves into leaders because they have all these visions, while being the legislators, the soothsayers, the augurs, and the dreamers of vertical dreams. They have all kinds of dreams and ideas in their imagination, but it's not founded in rationality and logic and reason and science, right? All those who do extraordinary things by means of strange devices and secret arts and withal, which are not men of science, they belong likewise to this third class. All people that you see that every once in a while have various visions and ideas that sometimes might come up and might sound really good or make sense, but they're not grounded in reason. Those are the soothsayer class. That's the third class of people. You ought to obtain knowledge of what should a person do? You should obtain knowledge of the true reality. First, you have to fix your rational factor. You have to know what's real, right? You have to know what's actual, right? You have to understand the world the way the world actually is. Which is that some people belonging to this third class have, even while they are weak, right? And you need to realize this, Rambam says, right? Because you should know that some people that aren't these soothsayers, they may have all these visions and ideas, right? Extraordinary imaginings, dreams, and amazed states, which are like the vision of prophecy, so that they think about themselves that they are prophets. And they are very much pleased with what they apprehend in these imaginings. And they themselves think that they're imagining all kinds of wonderful things that they think, right? And think they acquired sciences without instruction. And they think they have all of the rational knowledge, the knowledge of science, without ever having to open up a science book. They think they know it all, right? and they bring great confusion into speculative matters of great import. These people, when they give us their ideas and they tell us things that are counter-rational, right? And they're basing it on their musings. I mean, you can, I don't want to point fingers, but you can imagine people like this, people that have grandiose ideas, sometimes good ideas and sometimes evil ideas, but grandiose ideas that are not founded in logic and reason and real knowledge. They're founded in little tiny bits and pieces. We're going to see in the next chapter how Rambam describes they have little tiny bits and pieces of knowledge that aren't really structured and aren't functional and aren't attached to anything in reality, but might have a tiny sliver of truth hiding in them. And that's all they have for a rational faculty. The rest they have is all their imaginings. Imagine what kind of damage that can do when they try to guide policy. When they try to tell people and lead people how to make decisions and lead the public into various directions. So they bring great confusion into speculative matters of great import, true notions being strangely mixed up in their minds with imaginary ones. Just think of your favorite conspiracy theorist, and that's what you have, right? Or, that's exactly what he's talking about, where they have tiny little bits of knowledge mixed in with tons and tons of lack of knowledge, lack of time and effort to find the truth and understand the true science. And then they have some kind of a vision, and they make that, and they base it on their little shred of non-knowledge, and it becomes a very extremely dangerous. Okay, so all this is due to the imaginative faculty, to the weakness of the rational faculty, and to its of not having obtained anything. In other words, this person is a person who never learned. He never went to school. He never got a college degree. He's rationalizing. He's talking about things that related to physics, and he never studied physics. He's giving you medical advice, and he never went to medical school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can all find your favorite charlatan. Okay, so I mean thereby that it has not passed into actuality. This person has never actualized his rational faculty. He has never given it the exercise that it needed. So these are the three classes of people. There's the scientists, right, who haven't perfected their imaginative faculties, so they never get to the step. They might have tons of rational knowledge, but as human beings, they're not necessarily good human beings because they haven't yet gotten to the imaginative faculty. They're not bringing it out. They're not sharing that vision, and it hasn't actualized and become into a vision that's gonna change the world. There's the prophets who have both, right? And then there's the soothsayers who skip the rational step and moved straight to the imaginary one. It is known, and I'm in the bottom paragraph on 374, that in each of these three classes there are very many differences of degree, and that each of the first two classes is divided into two parts, as we have explained. So in other words, there's differences of degree, right? Of just how high or low a person is on the hierarchy of the categories that I just mentioned. For the measure of the overflow that comes to each of these two, right? Meaning to the two faculties, the rational and the imaginative, is either such as only to render the individual who receives it perfect and to have no other effect, or, like, in other words, a person can have this rational faculty and he can even extend it to it as imaginative faculty, and he can therefore become a good person himself, perfect, right? Or such that in individual's perfection there's something left over that suffices to make others perfect. With regard to the first class, that of the men of science, and now if I'm talking now about the first class of people, the one who had their rational faculties set but not their imaginative, the measure of the overflow that reaches the rational faculty of the individual is sometimes such that it makes him into a man who inquires and is endowed with understanding, who knows and discerns, but is not moved to teach others or compose works. He sits and he studies physics and he gets it all and never teaches it to anybody, never writes it down, never explains it to anybody, neither finding in himself a desire for this nor having the ability to do it, right? So in other words, what use is that? All right. So you have one guy who's okay. He knows it all. Yay. But it doesn't, if it stops with him, what's the point? Right. And sometimes the measure of the overflow is such that it moves him of necessity to compose works and to teach. The same holds good for the second class, right? If we're talking about the prophet, there's different levels in a prophecy. Sometimes the prophetic revelation that comes to a prophet only renders him perfect and has no other effect. It could make him into a good person, change the kind of person that he is. But sometimes the prophetic revelation that comes to him compels him to address a call to the people, to teach them, and let his own perfection overflow toward them. And those are the prophets that we read about in the books of the prophets. And let's see, the next paragraph, Rambam is going to talk about them a little bit more in a really beautiful way. So it has become clear to you that were it not for this additional perfection, sciences would, in other words, if no one ever reached the level of that overflow of this knowledge and imagination and these images and this wisdom to be carried forth, to be given over to others, to overflow, to continue. Remember the whole concept of overflowing and overflowing and overflowing, right? Sciences wouldn't be set forth in books, and prophets would not call upon the people to obtain knowledge of the truth. The prophets never would have gotten up and told us to start behaving ourselves and start and searching for the truth. Sciences would never have written down textbooks to teach the next generation, right? For a man endowed with knowledge does not set anything down for himself in order to teach himself what he already knows. People, I mean, sometimes I guess we might write notes to ourselves to help us to organize thoughts, but the bottom line is we don't write books to teach ourselves if we're the ones writing the book, right? Because we know the knowledge. We write the books to teach somebody else, right? But the nature of that intellect is such that it always overflows and is transmitted from one who receives that overflow to another one who receives it after him, until it reaches an individual beyond whom this overflow cannot go, and whom it merely renders perfect. Eventually, the knowledge will flow and flow down. There will be people that are only able to receive it and not transmit it. As we have set out in a parable in one of the chapters of this treatise, I kind of mentioned chapter 11. That was where Rambam first introduced us to this whole idea of the overflows, starting with the active intellect from God himself, all the way through the different spheres and all the way down into the world that we live in, the sphere beneath the moon sphere, which is in the Rambam's cosmology where we all reside. The nature of this matter makes it necessary for someone to whom this additional measure of overflow has come. So what happens is when a person receives this overflow, right, and his rational knowledge is of the level where he's perfected it, he's studied, he understands, right, the world around him, he's worked on his education and his logic and his reason, etc. And he's worked on himself so that his imaginative faculty is completely controlled by his rational thoughts, and now his imaginative faculty is imagining these images of truth, these images of greatness. All of a sudden, the nature of this matter makes it necessary for someone to whom this additional measure of overflow has come. When a person is receiving that kind of overflow from God, to address a call to the people, regardless of whether that call is listened to or not. He's going to be the one that calls it out from the mountaintops, even if nobody shows up at the foot of the mountain to listen to his speech, right? Or even if the people that are at the foot of the mountain aren't paying attention and they're schmoozing and ignoring everything that he has to say, he still feels it's necessary for him to share this vision. Such a person can't close himself off in a room, right, and just keep it to himself. It's just impossible. We even find that prophets addressed the call to the people until they were killed, right? The story of the Navi Zechariah in I forget which one of the Judaic kings, who was killed, when he was trying to tell the king to stop worshiping idols, and he was literally killed in the not the famous Navi Zechariah of the book Zechariah, but a different one in the Chronicles, and who was killed by the people, right? But the divine overflow moving them by no means letting them rest and be quiet, even if they met with great misfortunes. For this reason, you will find that Jeremiah, peace be upon him, explicitly stated that because of the contempt he met with at the hand of the disobedient and unbelieving people who lived in his time, he wished to conceal his prophecy and not to address to them a call to the truth, which they rejected, but he was not able to do it. I'm going to read from the Hebrew because it's just beautiful reading Yirmiyahu and Amos, because Rambam quotes from both Yirmiyahu and Amos, where Yirmiyahu says in chapter 20, verse 8, Ki midei adaber ezok. For every time I speak, I cry out. Chamas vashod ekra. I cry out about the corruption and the violence that I see around me. Ki hayad dvar Adonai li, because the word of God came to me, lecherpa o lekelas kol hayom. It causes me to be abused and to be made fun of all day. But I can't stop myself from calling out, Yirmiyahu says. And he continues, Amarti lo ezkirenu, right? And I told myself I should stop talking about it. V'lo adaber od b'shmo, let me stop speaking in the name of God. V'haya belibi ke'esh bo'eres, but in my heart it was like this fire burning. Atzur bi'atzmosai, it was like closed up in my bones. V'nil esi chalkel, and I was exhausted, right, from trying to hold it in below uchal, but I couldn't. I just couldn't hold it in. It was like this fire. I just had to let it out. Those that was the words of Yirmiyahu in Amos, chapter 3, verse 8, where he says, Aryeh sha'og, it's a lion has roared, Milo yira, who would not be afraid? Adonai Elohim diber, God, the Lord God himself has spoken, Milo yinaveh, who cannot prophecy, who cannot speak the word of God. You know, I can't stop. I can't not do it. This is so, and this, so we're getting an image with each one of these chapters. We develop further what the image in the Rambam's mind of a prophet is, right? In the last chapter, he told us about his moral and ethical perfection, how he had to learn and study and know science and understand rational and reason, and how he's so involved in that his imaginative faculty has no longer any selfish things about it, no longer any, it's now that imaginative faculty sees and senses and responds to things in the world purely on the basis of what's good and what's right and what's true. And then the overflow that comes from God, that goes through his rational faculty and through his imaginative faculty, brings this vision, this flow, that he just has to share. And there you have a prophet. Okay, go ahead. Good timing. You got to unmute yourself.
I got myself unmuted. Yeah,
Okay.
I was waiting for you to finish this. So two questions. First of all, age of prophecy. Did Maimonides believe a modern day prophet was still a possibility? That was my first question. And B, did Maimonides think he might be it?
He might think that he might be a prophet?
Yeah, he's working towards it. I feel like he's talking a little bit about himself, how he came to his own knowledge. So it just makes me wonder if maybe that's his reasoning behind all of his studies in all the realms.
Well, there's no question that he is describing to his own philosophy on how he lived his life, you know, intellectually and morally, ethically, and how he perfected his own knowledge and person. And now, in terms of whether or not a person can have prophecy today, so the Rambam said, remember, at the end of 37, that we don't have prophecy anymore because we're in exile. And when we're in exile and we're subjected to exile, and there's so much suffering and pain and sadness and anger and so on in the world, right? We just, in those kind of moods, we can't have prophecy. The flip side is, and we're actually about to see in 38, where the Rambam said this process, which I'm emphasized all the way in the beginning of the lecture, which is really a scientific process, according to the Rambam. This idea of the emanation and overflow coming from God to the active intellect, to the imaginative faculty. This is the process. This is the way our brains work, our minds work, right? So there is bits of lower levels of prophecy that are accessible to all of us, that we all practice all the time. So but there's a certain level beyond which nowadays, right, that level which comes from God, right, that level of which we just can't access simply because the world is just too sad of a place, you know. And in the days of Mashiach, right, in the days of the Messiah, then we're going to be the world will be in a redeemed state where we can have prophecy again, because
right.
because we're just, we just can't. I mean, we look at the world around us, and it's just not, we can't, we can never really be happy. It's a pretty sad thought, but it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, we might be able to ignore it every once in a while, and then a boat hits a bridge. you know
Yeah. Yeah.
um so it's not, it's just not a, anyway. So that's, yeah. So but there is a certain level which everyone has. Yeah, go ahead. I see another hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering, Maimonides gives us two faculties, I guess. One is the rational faculty, and the other is the imaginative
Right.
faculty. But there are other things that are going on in the mind that, for instance, memory. Does he discuss memory or recollection of things? And I mean, obviously, you have to be able to remember things in order to have a rational analysis of.
Yeah. I don't, actually, a little bit he's going to touch on memory in chapter 38. But the Rambam, the memory is goes within both faculties, in the rational and in the imaginative. The brain has a way of storing that overflow in file cabinets, right? But he is going to talk about memory in the sense that, like we like we train our rational brain to learn things, to know knowledge, and we train it, we exercise it like a muscle to learn how to analyze and how to seek truth and how to derive A from B and B from C, right? So
Does he speak about emotion at all? That's a mental. I mean, that may be a more modern
yeah,
concept.
because
Emotions.
emotion is kind of mixed in with thought. I don't know that, uh he does talk about it a lot in the Mishnah Torah and Hilchos Deos. We're going to see a little bit. You mentioned emotion, which to some a little bit he touches on, not really, but in the first paragraph which we're about to read, and a little bit about memory in the end of chapter 38. I don't know if we're going to get through all of chapter 38 tonight, but these, yeah, but you're definitely right. I mean, it's just not a sophisticated theory of the mind like you'd find in a 20th century, a psychoanalyst, like Freud trying to develop some, or the many other models of how our brain works that have been thought of since then. I'm just not an expert at these things. But so it's not quite as sophisticated as that. And yeah, and you bring up a good point. Memory and emotion are certainly, not teased out as well as they would have been, in our day. Let's see, because we'll have a little bit of a feeling of emotion in a minute. You'll see what I mean. Let's see. Any other comments on 37 before I go on? All right. Okay. So let's try. Let's see how much we can do of 38. No, that in every man there is necessarily the faculty of courage. This is what I mean. Courage is not exactly an emotion, but it's close. So we have a certain amount of courage, right? Because if we had no courage, were this not so, he would not be moved in his thought to ward off that which harms him. Like, you would literally sit there, and if you wouldn't swat a fly that landed on your forehead. You wouldn't do anything that bothered you. Like, you'd have fear of everything, right? So you have to have some amount of courage. You have to be brave enough, to stand up and walk to the kitchen refrigerator and open the door, right? And not be worried that you're going to be struck by lightning on the way or whatever, right? So there has to be some amount of courage in every human being, right? Among the faculties of the soul, this faculty is, to my mind, similar to the faculty of repulsion among the natural faculties. This is also the idea that we have a fear, right? Right. So I think what he means here by repulsion, and you'll see why I say this, he's not referring to disgust, but he's referring to fear. It might be related to disgust, right? But we all have a level of fear, right? If we see a giant monster chasing us, we're afraid, right? We have a certain amount of fear. Fine. The faculty of courage varies in strength and weakness, as do other faculties. So you may find among people some who will advance upon a lion, someone who's so brave, he sees a lion, he'll go attack it, right? And others flee from a mouse. You see another person who shrieks their head off and runs out of the room when they see a mouse run across the floor, right? So the level of courage differs, right, between people. You will find someone who will advance against an army and fight it. You find a brave warrior who single-handedly will take on a vast army of enemies, right? And you find another who will tremble and fear. And please, the women that are listening, don't be insulted. If a woman shouts at him, Rambam is thinking of a woman as somebody who's weak that you shouldn't be afraid of. So, and you can have a guy who's scared even of a woman. There also must necessarily exist a temperamental preparation in the original natural disposition. So just like there are differences among human beings, you know, some people are more brave, some people are more fearful, right? There must be in the original natural disposition, in other words, which may increase through the passage of that which is potential to actuality, right? So like a person can be born a little bit more fearful or a little bit more courageous, but they can exercise that, right? They can train it themselves to be more brave, right? Through they might have the potential to be a brave warrior, but they have to be taught. They have to practice. They have to gain more confidence, right? A passage affected in consequence of an effort made with a view to it and in accordance with a certain opinion, right? So you decide, I want to be a courageous warrior. So you take upon yourself first a smaller challenge, and then a bigger challenge, and then a bigger challenge. And then you get knocked down a few times, but you get back up, and so on and so forth, until you train yourself to being stronger, more brave, or less afraid, or whatever. It may also diminish through a deficiency of exercise. And the same thing could happen the other way around. You could have the capacity to be a brave warrior, but if you sit around and run away from every challenge that presents itself to you in life, you let that wither, right? It can diminish through a deficiency of exercise. You never exercise your courage, right? You're constantly afraid, right? You never take any risk, right? So you end up becoming a coward, right? The abundance or the weakness of this faculty in the young is made clear to you from their infancy. And you can see sometimes in a child, that they may have certain propensities or certain abilities or skills or lack thereof, right? That you see in their nature from the beginning. And you can either train it and enhance it, or you can do the opposite. Similarly, and this is where it goes to what Billy was saying before, the faculty of divination. In other words, we were talking about before about how there's because prophecy works. See, this is the thing. When Rambam's explanation of prophecy is following, in his mind, this is a scientific explanation of how our thoughts work, how our brains work, right? The active intellect, right? Remember, Aristotle said the same thing, right? The scientists were saying the same thing in those days, right? So we're all on a certain level, some kind of a prophet, right? But on a just much smaller level. So the faculty of divination exists in all people, but varies in degree. Our ability to divinate, which literally means to be able to anticipate what's going to happen, okay? It can also be called intuition, right? We just see certain things that because of the knowledge we've gained and experience we've gained in our lives, we just know that the likely outcome of this A, B, and C is going to be D, right? We could see it. We all know this, and it exists especially with regard to things with which a man is greatly concerned and about which his thought turns. Like, we can watch situations unfold, right? With certain people, we know how they react, and we just know this is going to blow up into a big fight, right? We just know the situation is going to lead to someplace no good, right? We know this is going to lead to somebody punching somebody, right? Or we know, or the opposite. We know this is, if we act in a certain way, it'll lead to bringing love between two people, right? Right. So the things that we care about, the things that matter to us, we can just watch it happen, right? I mean, I fortunately, as a doctor, I see this like almost every encounter. Person comes in, you see certain things about her that just trigger in your mind. You generally what kind of person based on the way she talks, the way she acts, the way she answers questions, the way she asks questions, and you pretty much know that when you say this, this, and this, it's kind of going to lead to that, that, and that, right? You just feel it. Every once in a while, you always have to have an open mind, because every once in a while you're wrong, right? But 99 times out of 100, if you're doing something that you're familiar with, right, you see where it's going, right? And all of us in our own fields, in our own lives, in our families, in our interactions, we see this. Thus, you will find in your soul that so and so spoke or acted in such and such a manner in such and such an episode, and the thing is really so. Like, you might think to yourself, you might even have in your mind already the image of so and so saying such and such or doing such and such, and then you find out the next day that that's actually what happened, and it doesn't surprise you. It's almost like you are a prophet, but it's not because you're a prophet. It's because we know what happens when Joe goes to the bar. We know what happens, right? He ends up getting into a fight, and he comes home with a black eye, right? That's just, and you saw it like a prophet, right? So you will find among people a man whose conjecturing and divination are very strong and habitually hit the mark. You'll find some people who are really good at this, right? So that he hardly imagines that a thing comes to pass without its happening wholly or in part as he imagined it. The causes of this are many. There are various anterior, meaning a posterior. Anterior, I think, means things which happened in this person's past. In other words, he's watched things happen a certain way. Posterior things in the future, meaning I presume means that he's seen certain circumstances lead to certain results, and present circumstances. In other words, and he also understands what's going on now. What's the weather like today? What are they serving at the bar? What kind of music is playing? And who's the speaker? Who's going to get the crowd riled up? So what's, you can sense what's coming. But in virtue of the strength of this divination, the mind goes over all these premises. The mind takes all these things, and it's a little bit touching on that memory. And he's going to touch again on memory at the end of this chapter. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to get to the end today. And draws for them conclusions in the shortest time. Sometimes it's like a zap, like right away. You just see A, B, C, D. You see this circumstance, these people hanging together, drinking this whiskey together. This is what's going to be, right? I could just see it happening. And we all make these kinds of judgments, and we could just see it happening, so that it is thought to happen in no time at all. So it seems as if this person just somehow conjured up the future, right? In virtue of this faculty, certain people give warnings concerning great future events. Some people, and we know who they are, can prognosticate about what's going to happen, right? When we read, articles from experts on crowd behavior, and they'll tell you, this is a perfect storm. If this and this and this happens, we're going to see a riot. These two faculties must necessarily be very strong in prophets, right? I mean, the faculty of courage and that of divination. They, number one, have to have courage, and the prophets are very good at understanding the situation that they're looking at, right? Remember, these are people who have perfected their knowledge, right? And perfected their imaginative faculty, so that when they're thinking about the situation in an honest, selfless way, right? So when the intellect overflows towards them, these two faculties become very greatly strengthened, so that this may finally reach the point, namely the lone individual having, and there's the image, think about Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moses, having only his staff, went boldly to the great king, the Pharaoh, in order to save a religious community from the burden of slavery, right? And he had no fear or dread, because it was said to him, I shall be with you, right? Because God said, I'll be with you, right? That Moshe was able to stand with nothing more than just a stick in his hand in front of the most powerful leader of the day and tell them to free the people, right? This is appropriate to the upcoming Pesach holiday. This too is a state that varies in them, but it is indispensable for them. Not always do they have all of that fearlessness, but it's indispensable for them to to have that quality in order to carry out their mission. And here I'm gonna just read from Yirmiyahu and from Yechezkel some verses that he's about to think, just because they're beautiful. I'm gonna read them inside in the Hebrew rather than in here. So Yirmiyahu chapter 1, right? Verse 8. Al tira mipnehem, right? Do not be afraid of them. Ki itcha ani, because I am with you, lahatzilecha, to save you, Num Adonai, says God. And then it continues in verse 17. V'atot te'azor masnecha, gird your loins, tighten up your belt. V'kamta v'dibarta aleim, and get up and stand and speak to the people. Es kol asher anochi atzaveka, everything I command you. Al techas mipnehem, don't be afraid of them, right? Pen achitcha lifnehem, because if you're afraid of them, then I will let you break in front of them. In other words, you have to be fearless. I am making you like a fortified city, amud barzel, it's an iron pillar, l'chomos nechoshes, and bronze walls. I'll call aretz over the land. L'malchei Yehuda, to go speak to the kings of Judah, l'sareh, to all the officials, the kohana, and to the priests, l'am aretz, and to all of the citizens of the land. So that's the Yirmiyahu, where he needed to have the strength. He had a different challenge than Moshe. Moshe had the challenge of facing Paro. Yirmiyahu arguably had a more difficult challenge. He had to face a people that had no interest in listening to the message he had to give. In fact, they were angry with him for giving them this message and derided him. So he had to stand before a jeering crowd that really did not want to hear any rebuke. I don't know which one is more difficult, but obviously both a very different type of difficulty. And then Yechezkel, Ezekiel verse 6, chapter 2. Again, God is giving him a difficult message also to speak before people that weren't interested in listening to the message. V'atov en adam, and you human being, al tira mehem, do not be afraid of them. Midivrehem al tira, do not be afraid of the things that they're going to say, meaning about you. Ki soravim v'salonimosach, they are like thorns and pokey thistles or whatever that are just poking you. That's what these people are like. When you talk to them, it's like you're sitting on a bunch of scorpions. But midivreim al tira, but do not be afraid of their words. Umipneim al techas, and do not be fearful. Do not of them kives mirihema. They were just a bunch of rebellious people. So these are the image. So Rambam is drawing us an image. Remember, he told us about in a couple chapters ago in 36 about how the prophet has to work on his knowledge, science, logic, reason, etc., knowing the truth for what it is. Real education, not just think you know everything, right? Then he talked about being ethically and morally and perfect and selfless in order to that your imaginative faculty is thinking properly. And then he talked in the last chapter, right? He talked about how the prophet is taken by this overflow to not just have his knowledge stop with him, but he has to bring that knowledge to others. And now the Rambam is saying the next thing that makes a prophet is courage and faith, in God, right? And willingness to stand up even if he's putting himself in great danger. Faith that God will protect him because he's delivering God's message, and if God doesn't protect him, then he's willing to give his life for it. But this is the image of a Navi that Rambam is portraying, and he's going to continue to do this as we continue. But he made the idea of prophecy something that's much more accessible, something that we can understand. The prophet is someone who can know and look and read and see the signs, right? And this level, all of us are like a little bit prophets, right? Anyway, I think we'll have to continue from this paragraph. Know that the true prophets, will start from there next time. Next week, by the way, I won't be able to teach. I'm sorry. I'm going to be in Germany. I have going for the army all week next week. I'm going to be in Germany, so it won't be next week, but the week after, Mitzvah will continue. Any questions, comments? Thoughts?
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. All right. So thank you for joining again, and have a wonderful evening. All right. Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.